two of the boys left behind them a trail of discreetly discarded eyeglass frames. Macaluso, the sergeant who had remained behind and who had observed the roundup from the steps leading to the station, went back inside, pulled out a number of forms from the drawer of his desk, and set a dozen or so pencils on top of them. When the first few came in, he pointed to the papers and said, "Take a pencil and a form. Fill it out. Give it to me when you're finished." The smallest of the boys said, "Please, signore, may I make a phone call?" His voice held the promise of tears, but still the officer, who had 3 children, stood and shouted, "Silenzio!" at the group. When the talking stopped, he added, "No, you cannot make any phone calls, not until you fill out the form. Then you can each make 1 call." He saw one of the boys at the back of the group raise his phone in front of him and start to touch the keys. "Andolfatto, take his phone," the sergeant ordered, pointing towards the boy with the phone in his hand. The officer walked over and snatched the phone before the boy could try to lower it. "That's my—" he started to say, but the officer who had taken it turned and gave him a look so cold it turned the boy to ice. The officer walked back to the desk at the front of the room and tossed the boy's phone carelessly on the surface. While this was happening, another boy cupped his phone in his hand and started to tap in a text, but the light reflected off the glasses of the boy standing beside him. The sergeant saw the flicker and got to his feet. The phone disappeared. The sergeant bent over and picked up the wastepaper basket beside his desk and emptied it on the floor. Ripped forms, used Kleenex, 3 or 4 crumpled maps of Venice, and 6 or 7 cardboard cups that had contained coffee fell to the floor. The sergeant looked into it, and, seeing it was clean, took 2 steps towards the boys. "All right, pay attention, all of you. 2 of you do something wrong, the rest of you pay the price." He shoved the basket into the hands of the boy nearest him and raised his voice to address them all. "When your friend here walks by you, put your phone in." There was a collective gasp, after which came an indignant, "But—" The sergeant moved as quickly as a snake, and in less than a second stood in front of a boy in his mid-teens, taller than he and far more muscular. "You have something to say, Sonny?" the sergeant asked in a neutral voice. "You couldn't wait to call Mommy and Daddy, could you? Well, now you're all going to have to use my phone and call them one by one." He turned and looked at the standing boys. "This causes you trouble? Talk to your friend here," and went back to his seat. The boy with the wastepaper basket came up to the desk and set it down. Before the sergeant could ask, he reached into the side pocket of his jacket, pulled out his own phone, and set it gently on top of the other phones. "They all there?" he asked the boy. "Yes, sir." "How many?" 22, sir," he said, lowering his head. In a softer voice he added, "Garvani had 2. The sergeant looked at the boy in front of him, only now seeing a boy's fear that he'd somehow be held responsible for this. The sergeant leaned over the desk and said softly, so only the boy would hear, "You think he's schizophrenic?" and smiled. When the boy did not react, the sergeant clarified things by saying, "So he'd need 2 different telephones?" It took the boy a moment to understand what the sergeant had said. When he finally understood, he tried not to smile. "Yes, sir," he said. Before the sergeant could respond, a voice came from the back of the group. "Officer?" "What?" "Is there a toilet here?" There followed a few snickers, after which the sergeant said, "And if I told you it was out of order for anyone who just laughed, and it will be a few more hours before anyone comes to get you, would you still laugh?" Then, turning his attention to the boy who had asked the question, he said, "Down the end of the corridor on your right."